it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here today, and I'm creating another art journal page for today's PB&J video. And here's a look at the page I'll be creating from start to finish. And to create this page, I'm using some of Penny Black's new slapstick cling stamps, flowerettes, verdure, and I'm also using a stencil called Oscillations. These are great for art journaling, and to embellish my page I've used a couple of butterflies from the die shown here, as well as the sentiment die, and I'll have all the exact numbers and names listed at the end of the video on a supply list. So to begin, I'm working in my Delusions art journal, and just to make sure that the pages are extra strong and I don't have to worry about any curling or warping, I'm using Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft gel medium to adhere 2 pages together, and I'll do this on the left and the right. So I just painted that onto one page and pressed them together, and then I'll do that again, like I said, on the right hand side too. Now to prepare my pages for painting, I'm using Golden Absorbent Ground. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm going to be using some of my shimmer sprays, and I really like the way they look on this surface. So I did just one coat to both pages. And I'm also going to add some texture before I start spraying the page. So this is the Textures paste from Shimmers, and I'm using the Penny Black Stencil Oscillations, and I'm just looking here for the design or the layout that I'd like with that stencil. I'm not looking for perfection. I just want to have some of the pattern peeking through and then some of just the texture showing. This is a very texturized texture paste, and it has bits of mica, some shimmer, and it's just, I really like it for up here along the edges of the page. So I'm just applying it sort of randomly through the stencil, this section of the stencil. What's great about the stencil is you get 3 different patterns that you can use, which is nice when you can get some variety from just one product. So I put it through the stencil. Then I'm also going to take my palette knife, just scrape off any extra that went on the edges. And then I'm going to pick up just some of that paste alone and spread it along the top and the sides, just alone, even over some of the areas that I stenciled. Because like I said, I want some of the pattern coming through and some of it just to be texture that's showing. I'm doing a pretty thin layer, just because I'm not patient and I don't like waiting for things to dry, and it's really not necessary to add very much. And I just keep playing around till I'm happy with that effect. Now for this art journal page, I'm really working on just creating a fun background first. Not exactly sure where I'm going with it, so I am starting with these layers of texture on the top. Now I'm using a variety of shimmer sprays with different levels of shimmer, all the way down to some that do not have any shimmer. And to get them ready, I just roll them between my hands, and that just mixes up the shimmer. And I'll have all of the exact colors listed at the end of the video. I just put some paper in there and a towel beneath to soak up any extra spray and keep my work surface sort of clean. I love this combination of colors for creating a sky and a ground effect. And they have different levels of shimmer, and some don't shimmer at all, so it's fun to see how they mix and match together. And you can see how fun they look on that surface that's been primed with the absorbent ground. So I did my first layer, just spraying and moving the bottle as I spray. And then I let that dry, and I'm going back now with a second layer. And to speed up the drying process, I just used an old hair dryer. I prefer that to my heat gun when drying backgrounds like this. And you can see how the color just builds up and it gets more vibrant as you go. Once that was dry, I'm going to use this new stamp called Verdure, and it is so great for these backgrounds. And I'm inking it with StazOn ink in the color of Emerald City. And I'm just going to stamp this around the edges. So really what I'm working on with this page right now is just building up some background textures, and I'm just playing and having fun and seeing what I come up with. I'm not looking for any of this stamping or the textures or even the sprays to have a real even or perfect effect, because I know a lot more layers are going to go on top. And for me, starting with the background like this was really fun. It just felt like I was just playing around, trying different things, seeing how they interacted with each other. And so if you're starting art journaling, this might be a way that you want to go. I've done another video where I stamped an entire scene first and then added my color. So there's just a couple approaches that you can try with art journaling. I like how that kind of framed in that outer edge of the page. Now I wanted to push back some of that stamping a little bit, so I'm going for an opaque medium here. This is an acrylic paint. And I'm just going to put some here on a palette paper, and then just added a little bit of water to thin it down, and I'm just lightly brushing that along the edges of the page. So I wanted that stamping to show, but I didn't want it all to show. And this just kind of pushes it back into the background. And I'll blend with my fingertip too. Sometimes I feel like I have a little bit more control and have less of those brush strokes if I go in with my hand. And I can just pat up some of that with a baby wipe too, if I get it while it's still wet. But I'm not scrubbing with the baby wipe because I don't want to lift that background color that I sprayed on. And then down here at the bottom, I'll add some of the green acrylic paint. This is a heavy body acrylic paint, which means it's just a thicker paint, and I think it's a little bit more opaque. So sometimes I do add water to it just to make it a little bit runnier and easier to apply. And then I added even more water and some splatters using the blue. And I got a little crazy there, so I'm just blotting up some of that with a baby wipe. Now I'm going to add my flowers to the ground, and this is the Flowerettes image from Penny Black, an awesome size for art journaling. It's nice for backgrounds, but here I wanted it to really be the main focal point of the page. So I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I'm just going to stamp this down. I'm not worried about coloring in those flowers. I'll show you how I'll do that later, but this is just to create the overall layout and design. I like how by altering the heights of this image, it can create like a whole field of flowers. And you really can't tell that it's a repeated stamp. It just looks like they fit together like that. You can even turn it to the side. Now to seal this, before I move on to my next step, I'm going to use this decoupage medium. When I apply it, I'm not going to really scrub hard with the brush. I'm very lightly applying it over the top. And I want to seal this because I'm going to be adding some markers and some other mediums to the top, and I didn't want that background that I sprayed to keep reblending. So I made sure that VersaFine ink that I stamped the flowers with was dry, and then I'm just putting this light layer of decoupage medium on the top. And then I'll allow that to dry. I stamped these flowers multiple times onto just a thin cardstock, and just to quickly color them in, I'm using Distress Stain. So I could just pat that right on top, and then I just fussy cut those flowers out. And they're really easy to cut out. They're pretty smooth images or edges that are easy to cut. Now to put them on the page, now I'm putting that same decoupage medium down where the flower goes. I'll lay it down, and then because the Distress Stain can start to reblend, I'm just again using a pretty light pressure with that brush to put the decoupage medium on top. And I didn't have any trouble with that starting to bleed. And I did that, and you'll just see me here doing that for all of these flowers. Now because I already put a layer of that decoupage medium over the entire page, I don't have to worry anymore about that background reblending or those sprays sort of reconstituting as I work on top of it. That'll be the same for these flowers. Since I'm putting a layer on top, once that is dry, then that Distress Stain isn't going to reblend at all. So now I'm going to use these Stampers Big Brush pens from Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft, and you have a little bit of time to work with these if you're working on a surface that has been sealed and has a non-porous surface. So that's again another reason why I wanted to put that decoupage medium over the entire page. So I just draw right on and then blend it with my fingertip. I did that to the stems, a little bit to the flowers, but I found that didn't really show too much, so I didn't continue with all of them. I did a few here, and then I decided to stop because it just wasn't having any impact. And then I also did around the edges of the flowers. So up here where the sky is blue, I did a little bit around the edges, and this helps give them a little more dimension and to pop into the foreground with some of that busy background stamping and splatters. So I just color and blend with my finger. And you have some time here to work with these markers, but once they dry, they are permanent. So you can add more layers on top without worrying about them having reblending when you add layers on top. I also added a little bit of the blue to the stems of the flowers. And I decided I went a little too heavy with that around the edges. So I'm just taking a baby wipe, and even on the stems, I wasn't quite happy with the look of that. So I just pulled a little bit up with the baby wipe. Now to brighten up these flowers and give them more of a hand-painted look, I'm using some of that acrylic paint, and I'm just lightly painting it on top. Because I'm not putting too much or too thick of a layer, you can still see some of the details, the stamp details showing through. And then I watered that down and added some splatters to the background just for some extra movement. Now to my background, I'm going to use some gelatos. And like I said, when I was working on this, I just kept playing. And honestly, I think sometimes, I've said this in another video, my work this goes through an ugly phase, and the, the design process is just trying to make it look not ugly. And I think that's where I was at this point. I just felt like things weren't coming together. So maybe if I grab these gelatos and brighten things up, push some of that background stamping more to the back so that the flowers come forward a little bit. And I'm just coloring a heavy layer with that gelato onto the background and then blending with my fingertip. If I get too much, I can pull it up with a baby wipe. So that gelato is not permanent until it is sealed. So this page, when I'm all finished, I am going to do a spray fixative onto the page just so that that doesn't reblend, or when I close the book that the pages don't start transferring color onto each other. And before I add another color, I'm just wiping off my fingers before I start blending. And that I loved how that dark blue really made the flowers pop. And also, I just felt like that did unify the page. That was the finishing touch where I thought, oh, it's moving out of the ugly phase. So to bring some lightness and freshness to the page, I'm adding some white. And to do that, I'm just using that heavy body acrylic paint and a small paintbrush. And I find I like to use this to add white to my pages instead of a gel pen. I get frustrated with gel pens sometimes not working well for me, so this is a less frustrating way. And I also like here where I can add just a touch here and there and blend it with my fingertip. And so I'm doing that along the stems just to add some life to that portion of the page. I grab some with my fingertip, and I apologize, I'm off camera here, but I'm just rubbing that onto the top edge and doing it kind of lightly so it picks up on some of those textures and highlights those that we added up at the top of the page. And then again, more splatters, so I watered down that paint that was left and added those splatters to the background, just a few. Now to finish off the page, I'm adding this die cut sentiment and the die cut butterflies, and I totally forgot that I had those gelatos on there and they were not sealed yet. So you'll see here when I use that decoupage medium to put that on the top, those gelatos start blending on the top, but never fear, there is a solution. I just went ahead and re-die cut those and adhered them on top of those die cuts, and it actually ended up adding some extra dimension to those die cut pieces on the page. So that's why I remembered I better spray this page here when I'm done, just to seal in those gelatos. And they do really reblend and reconstitute, so I recommend a spray fixative for sealing those as opposed to something you would brush on, because you'd really start moving them around if you brushed on, say, like a decoupage medium where I'm doing that. So here you see me just fixing my little boo-boo. I'm just putting the decoupage medium right on the top of the existing pieces, and then I will stick the new ones on top. And then I also am putting I did put a little layer of white paint on top of those die cut pieces so they looked more like they fit with the rest of the page. And that's the good thing about die cuts. They cut exactly the same every time, so I can just add that right on top and add a little white paint. So here's a look at the finished page. I really had so much fun just relaxing and playing and creating and adding layers to this page as I went. And a couple close-ups here of the textures and of that sentiment added at the bottom. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, and our website, which I'll have links to all of those down in the description box below. And here's a list of all the exact supplies used on this art journal layout.